Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Battle Cry with me, Shiv Arur. This happens to be the last episode of Battle Cry in 2020. Don't worry, Battle Cry continues in the new year as well. But what better opportunity than this to look back on what has been an incredibly difficult year, but one that's been defined by national security and defense developments. So here's 2020, a year in defense.
A year of a historic military standoff that shows no signs of ending. The year when the Indian Air Force took its biggest leap in decades. A year when 4 democracies came together in full strength. When India's Atmanirbharta shined through in weapon tests. And a year when India realized just how costly peace is going to be. Battle Cry takes you back to the 5 defense stories that defined 2020. Five stories that shaped the year and made 2020 the year of the warrior.
The world's biggest military standoff, that's what it is. And it was easily not just one of the biggest defense events in India, but across the world. So there was no doubt in our minds when the Ladakh standoff between Indian and Chinese armies was number 1 in our list of stories in this lineup.
For India, if there is one thing that defined 2020 nearly as much as the COVID pandemic, it was the standoff with China in Ladakh. A standoff that continues even now. The deep winter freezing the situation into a solid stalemate. Hostile actions by China began early in May, just weeks into the global COVID-19 lockdown. With the world distracted by the terrifying new viral outbreak, China decided to mobilize its military in the biggest way since the 1962 war, triggering a massive standoff across hundreds of kilometers of frontier territory in eastern Ladakh. It was peak summer when the standoff began, and now in peak winter, it has disturbingly solidified. For weeks, the Indian public remained vaguely aware of Chinese aggressions in Ladakh. But it was only in mid-June that things escalated so dramatically that all of India was in the picture. On June 15th, Indian and Chinese troops clashed in a terrifying hand-to-hand brawl that left 20 Indian Army men, including commanding officer of the 16 Bihar Regiment, Colonel Santosh Babu, dead, and at least 16 Chinese soldiers, including their commanding officer. Even while senior commanders on both sides rushed in to keep the peace, both sides also mobilized dramatically. India's mobilization was codenamed Operation Snow Leopard. The Indian Air Force shifted into top gear by this time, providing massive air cover and surveillance across eastern Ladakh. With multiple rounds of post-Galwan talks failing to break the deadlock, it was in late August that the Indian Army made its first preemptive, proactive moves. Sensing that the Chinese were using talks as the ruse to move more forces into the area to occupy advantageous positions, the Indian Army hatched a secret plan to catch the creeping Chinese formations off guard and turn their hostile actions around on them. As 2020 draws to a close, thousands of Indian and Chinese troops remain massed at the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh, with no real end to the standoff in sight. A series of aggressions has set into a disturbing new normal. For how long more remains as foggy as the clouds over eastern Ladakh.
The second big defense story we've picked in the 2020 look back is the entry of the Rafale Jets. It became a huge media frenzy. There was national interest in the arrival of these aircraft, and what an arrival it was. We were there to cover it, and we were there at every moment. The arrival of the Rafales is story number 2 in the big 2020 look back.
The word Rafale has been echoing in India since 2018. The failed political football kicked around by the Congress party. But it was this September that the Jets finally arrived. With their arrival worked up into a media frenzy, the Jets were tracked from the moment they lifted off from France, stopped over in the UAE, and then, as the country watched in awe, the Jets were escorted through Indian airspace to their home base, where they received their ceremonial swagat. Cloudy skies over Ambala, briefly lit up by the roars of India's newest and most capable jets. The Rafales were ceremonially inducted into the Golden Arrows Squadron. Their arrival amidst the standoff with China in Ladakh was not missed. Over the last few months, the Rafales have been stretching their wings, and a second batch of Rafales has also since arrived. Thankfully, the Jets haven't had a chance yet to use their weapons, but the deterrent effect is difficult to ignore. The Scalp, for instance, is a cruise missile with ranges in excess of 500 kilometers, is stealthy and devastatingly accurate. The Meteor Beyond Visual Range missile is the most capable such weapon system in the world, with a range of well over 100 kilometers, completely outranging both Chinese and Pakistani weapons, and could prove a deterrent to air aggression. 2020 will go down as the year when Indian Air Force capabilities got their biggest boost in decades. An evolutionary leap that generations of current and future pilots will embrace as they fly for national security.
With the India-China standoff continuing, the third big story that we saw in 2020 was an incredible, unusual spate of weapons testing by Indian weapons labs. That's right, a huge flurry, nearly uninterrupted, of missile tests. Many of them known, many of them brand new and never known before. It was truly a missile flurry in 2020.
If there's another thing defense watchers will remember 2024, it's the large number of missile tests that India conducted.
1, now.
India's missile season began with this test. On the face of it, it looks like just any other missile test, right? Well, what you don't see is what's inside this missile carrier. And that's where the real juice is. It's this object, which looks like something out of a sci-fi movie. This is the hypersonic technology demonstrator vehicle. Blasted to an altitude of 30 km by the rocket-powered missile. This object then separated from the missile at a very high velocity. Hypersonic combustion was then triggered and sustained the vehicle on a designated flight path at a velocity of 6 times the speed of sound, nearly 2 kilometers per second for more than 20 seconds. The scramjet engine performed in a textbook manner, to the delight of scientists who were tracking it from the ground. India is a new entrant to the small hypersonic club, which so far has Russia, China, and the US as members. Then came another test of special significance in the Ladakh standoff. It's been fired before, but this was the first time it was publicized. This is the Rudra, India's brand new anti-radiation missile. Seen here launched from a Sukhoi MKI fighter high up over the Bay of Bengal. But what does an anti-radiation missile do? An anti-radiation missile is a weapon designed to detect and home in on an enemy radio emission source, mainly radars that make up the heart of enemy air defenses. And of course, this was a year when India's most formidable tactical weapon, the BrahMos Supersonic Cruise Missile, flexed muscle like never before. From island tests in the Andamans to the longest air-launched anti-ship mission, to several ship launches of the BrahMos and crucial tests of the extended range version that's now being ordered for the first time. The BrahMos truly got its time in the sun. It has been the year of the missile tests in all their brutal glory, and 2021 promises to be much more of the same.
And since we're picking the stories that really stood out in the world of defense, here's one that stood out across the world. The first coming together of what is known as the Quad in a military setting. Of course, we're talking about the Malabar Naval Exercise, for the first time involving India, the United States, Japan and Australia in a huge show of force projection in the Indian Ocean.
A year when the world's biggest threat has emerged from China. And a year when China has emerged as the world's biggest threat. 4 countries decided to come together, and they've sent out an unmistakable message. The Malabar 2020 exercise. India, the United States, Japan, and for the first time, Australia came together for this awesome foursome. The convergence of warships from across the Indian Ocean and the Pacific is no coincidence. This union of four like-minded democracies is called the Quad. And what they did in the Indian Ocean this week has the world sitting up and applauding. Headlining the war game was the Indian Navy's flagship aircraft carrier INS Vikramaditya. Bristling with MiG-29K fighter jets and helicopters, the Vikramaditya was sailing alongside another big carrier, the much larger and nuclear-powered USS Nimitz. Japan fielded its frontline destroyer, the JS Mursame. And Australia, the newest entrant into the grouping, brought its destroyer, HMAS Ballarat. But there were many more ships at play in this massive war game. Supporting the Nimitz was US Navy guided missile cruiser Princeton and destroyer Sterett. And finally, lurking beneath the surface, making its debut barely a year after entering a service, was the Indian Navy's Scorpene-class submarine INS Khanderi. The ships conducted all manner of joint drills, including air defense drills with fighters from the Vikramaditya and Nimitz. The Malabar message must have been loud and clear.
Now, India continues to be one of the biggest importers of weapons and equipment. It's a dubious distinction, and this modernization is going to continue for many, many years. And the situation in Ladakh against China this year actually triggered a huge spate of procurement efforts. Here's a lineup and a look back at all the weapons that India has decided to push the button on this year.
We've already told you about how the Ladakh standoff is 2020's biggest defense story. But behind the scenes, in 2020, India also decided to beef up its defenses, weaponize faster, and bring in even more military hardware. Here's a quick look back at the top weapon systems India initiated paperwork for this year to procure. For starters, a deal for 21 new MiG-29 jets that was in the works has been speeded up by the Ladakh tensions. The Indian Air Force operates over 60 of these jets, with several deployed in and around Ladakh. With new upgrades, these jets will be even more capable of defensive and offensive air operations. India's most capable fighter, the Sukhoi 30 MKI, is also seeing action in Ladakh. And the government has cleared decks now to add a dozen more of this jet to a fleet of nearly 300 aircraft. The largest of its type in the world. The additional 12 will also be manufactured by HAL in Maharashtra. Another major acquisition that's under clearance is a contract for more Israeli Heron drones. Already the mainstay of India's current surveillance drone fleet, these unmanned aircraft are seeing extensive use mapping the standoff zones in eastern Ladakh. The new Herons will be improved versions and could possibly even sport weapons capabilities. The Indian Air Force is also using the current tensions to push through a deal for more Israeli Spice 2000 precision-guided bombs. The same type that were dropped from Mirage 2000s in the Balakot airstrikes last year. An interesting new weapon system that could be ordered soon is the Israeli Firefly loitering munition. A helicopter-style mini-drone packing a sensor and a warhead, basically used by infantry teams to hunt down, pinpoint and attack kamikaze style. These devastating drones have recently been ordered by the Israeli Defense Forces as well. With the threat of Chinese airspace intrusions also at a high, the Indian forces are looking to push through a deal for a small number of Russian 9K 333 Verba man-portable air defense systems. The Verba is a modernized replacement of the Igla system that the Indian Air Force already uses. It remains to be seen how many of this particular system is finally ordered. Close infantry combat becoming a very real possibility in the standoff, and with rules of engagement changing on the China border, the Indian Army is also using fresh financial powers to double a previous order for American Sig Sauer 716 battlefield rifles. The first order for a similar number, over 72,000, has completed delivery, and the rifles are already deployed with Indian frontline troops. With China deploying large numbers of light tanks on its side, the Indian Army has felt a refreshed need for agile light mountain tanks of a similar kind. With the current regiments of Indian T-72 and T-90 tanks more suited to the plains, the Indian Army has formally begun a quest to acquire light tanks suitable for maneuvers in the rough high altitudes of Ladakh. It must be said that the requirement is over a decade old and only has been exacerbated by the current tensions.
Fire on area rectangle.
The Indian Army's newest artillery system, the ultra-light M777 guns, have been deployed in Ladakh, and now the Indian Army is looking to acquire more Excalibur extended-range guided shells for the gun, providing a far more accurate and capable frontline artillery capability. The Indian government is also considering placing more orders for the M777 guns themselves, but nothing's been finalized on that front. And finally, the Indian forces are expected to receive an Israeli air defense system for deployment at high altitude to plug many gaps. While it is unclear which system this specifically is, there has been speculation that it could be greater numbers of the already deployed Spider quick reaction anti-aircraft system. One of the most significant deals cleared in 2020 was for nearly 250 Astra beyond visual range air-to-air missiles. These fully indigenous air combat weapons have been tried and successfully tested by the Indian Air Force and will bring a formidable capability to frontline jets. These missiles, capable of engaging targets from a massive 100 kilometers away, will arm Indian Air Force Su-30 jets, the light combat aircraft Tejas, as well as the Indian Navy's MiG-29K fighters. Another Indian system that has received orders this year is the Pinaka multi-barrel rocket system, a devastating piece of rocket artillery that already arms several regiments of the army. The new order will allow the army to raise even more regiments of this feared Indian weapon and then pave the way for future contracts of the more capable guided version of the Pinaka. A list of just a dozen of the weapon systems that India has pushed through in 2020. With tensions against China and an uncertain world continuing for the foreseeable future, expect 2021 to be more of the same. We've listed just 10 major systems being pushed through amidst the current tensions. Expect there to be several more, as India beefs up and prepares for the long haul on a border that has seen blood for the first time in 45 years. Bureau Report, India Today.
And that brings us to a close to the last episode of Battle Cry for 2020. Be sure that we're going to be back with much more Battle Cry in the new year. So wishing you and your families the very best. And as we sign off from 2020, as we always say here on Battle Cry, remember India's strength will only be realized when no weapon is fired and no human needs to be sent into battle. Happy New Year and see you in 2021.
Hi everyone, Preeti Chaudhary here. Hope you like this video. For latest news and analysis, like and subscribe to the India Today YouTube channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated. Thank you for watching.